Hailing back from the days of Medarot Navi, it is the large, chunky, sturdy, in any manner of the form strong French doll type introduced in that game. It is FDL00 Cradle, with a kit of Confusion, Double Provoke, Sea Legs, and the leg ability of Elusive, which reduces incoming damage if the attacker's evade stat is lower than Cradle's. Now, as a model coming back from the days of Medarot Navi, any returnees from any older game is always going to be a welcome addition, and most certainly no exception for Cradle here as well, as a model that has yet to see the days of 3D until now. With its rather uncanny and very bulky-like appearance, it makes it kind of abundantly clear that Cradle's role on the field is a defender, but not necessarily in the role and manner that you might think it is. Confusion on the head part is an ailment-based melee skill that, upon attacking the target, inflicts it with confusion status. Anyone that is currently confused at that point will not be able to choose their next 3 actions or their targets on those 3 actions, or until it's attacked, of which the ailment is immediately removed. Now, confusion can be kind of a two-sided coin. It's something not to fully rely on, but when it kicks in, it is absolutely catastrophic for the enemy team. This means that the enemy that is confused has a chance to attack their own allies. If they're using a support or a defense skill, there's a chance that they can use it on enemies instead of their own allies, and even applies to healing skills as well. And it does give them a chance to kind of buy yourself a moment without having to really focus on them too heavily. Provoke on both arms is a melee attribute and an ailment skill that plays rather uniquely for being an ailment skill. Upon attacking the target, it inflicts the enemy with a taunt status. Anyone that is currently taunted at that time will be unable to attack anyone else except the one who inflicted the taunt, or in this case, Cradle. So this means that once all 3 or all enemies have been officially taunted, that means that the other 2 allies of Cradle will be basically free to move and act as they please because all the attention is going to be on Cradle and no one else, which is very solid in the realm of a defender type of department, as long as you're able to keep your damage reduction high enough to actually benefit from it. If you don't have very high armor or damage reduction, Provoke is going to be something that's going to be there more like a damage sponge more than a dedicated defender, such as, say, with Bosan, who does the aggro type of shielder and defender just a little bit more efficiently with his overall build. Sea Legs means that Cradle will have relatively solid and overall decent coverage across most terrains, as Sea Legs are kind of alright with most of them at the cost of not being as fast as, say, multiped or even bipedal legs, so it's definitely not going to be the speediest on the field, but when it comes to aquatic-based terrains, this leg will absolutely reign supreme then, because it is one of the terrains that very few, except float legs and even just a handful of terrain-specific leg abilities, are able to properly counter and master. So while everyone else is going to be slowing down pretty considerably on most terrains, Cradle is going to be basically swimming circles around any target that is in her vicinity, all the while drawing all the attention to herself very reliably and moderately consistently between Confusion and Provoke on either arm. When it comes to her leg stats, she's packing, of course, triple heavy support, which for a relatively chunky defender like this, a French doll like this one, it is kind of to be expected. A leg mobility of 672 isn't too shabby, as it means she can hold her own fairly decently well on most terrains, but she's going to be kind of relying on anything that does give her anything more than a 10 or even 20% boost to try to keep her evade as high, to keep her mobility as high as possible. However, she does comp this very, very nicely with an evade of over 2,000, so she's most certainly not going to have issues dodging or grazing incoming attacks, which, when all attacks are on her, she already has the chance to dodge and graze them just like any other Medarot would. She's just drawing all the enemy fire toward her instead. But this also ties very nicely in with Elusive, and an evade of over 2,000 is naturally pretty tough to beat. So against most enemies in particular, unless they are stupidly dodgy more so than her, she's going to be already having a pretty solid damage reduction also working in her advantage every time she's attacked, which will kind of help her keep on the field just a little bit longer than expected once all the numbers do add up in the final number crunching. With a melee resist of 1112 and a shoot resist of 922, She's kind of in that mid-range, I guess you can call it, but definitely on the lower end as far as defenders like her is concerned. Now, even though Cradle is an aggro magnet more than an actual defender, it is still worth noting that she is going to be relying pretty heavily on Elusive and the leg terrain compatibility to keep that number as high as possible. Because as long as she's drawing damage to herself, she is still taking damage and is able to be broken and damaged very easily. So having a healer on team to keep her healthy will be kind of imperative if you plan to use Cradle in any capacity. Now, as far as armor is concerned, she's not too shabby, actually, and actually pretty healthy in that department, as you'd expect a shielder or a defender of any kind to be. With a head HP of about 4199, almost 4200, right arm at 3900, left arm at 4200, and legs at just shy of 4100 as well. Pretty healthy HP pool overall for what Cradle brings to the table. Just make sure that, again, she is going to be relying really heavily on that high HP and her leg ability to try to keep that damage as low as possible, which does kind of hurt her overall viability in the long run. Given, though, that she is also using Provoke and Confusion as a triple ailment type of fighter, her only real weaknesses, of course, is anyone that does bring Stat Cleanse to the party, and she does not really have to worry about damage too much either between Confusion and Provoke. So even though she can hit kind of hard with base power in almost 1500 on either arm for Provoke, Confusion not so much, unfortunately, at just barely 500 there, but that's passable because it's an ailment. She can kind of hit hard, but it's not her dedicated role. All this being said, though, as a pure set score, I still do have to rate Cradle kind of a middle-of-the-road, kind of 5.5 out of 10. And I'm kind of being generous here in regards to Cradle's overall score, because while Confusion and Double Provoke can definitely work for an aggro type of shielder and defender, which is what Cradle's trying to do, the really modest resist stats with the 11-12 melee and the just barely 1000 shoot resist are definitely not going to be doing her a lot of favors. And like I keep saying, she's going to be relying extremely heavily on Elusive and any leg ability bonuses that she gets, or even any Medarot bonuses as well, to try to keep her damage as minimum as possible after she draws all the aggro to herself. As mixed parts, I do have to rate her just a little bit higher at a 6 out of 10. Primarily for the fact that, not to say that Confusion or Provoke are bad, but you have to kind of build around it and kind of keep a couple more considerations in mind to build this particular bot as chunky and as healthy as possible to really capitalize on that. Plus, C legs with a very solid base of Ada over 2000 is kind of hard to argue. Plus, given the fact that it's also triple heavy support, is also definitely worth a brownie point in her book as well. One final note to mention is it was listed that she is mentioned as FDL00, when in Navi she actually is considered the upgrade to the original French doll type Lala, who is the original 0. So I'm going to say this just to say that it's on the record for this particular breakdown. If it's a spoof and she is indeed FDL01, this is very easy to fix. Just kindly acknowledge that going forward. But if she is indeed the true 0 model, and we might see Lala later, well, we'll just have to see.